Okay, so today we're going to talk about Virtue, which is a skill in Python framework for automating IC design in Cadence Virtuoso. And so this has been used to put together some projects here at Skyworks. This includes Softworks, which is a library to enable software and documentation view types in the Cadence Virtuoso IC design environment, and then data panels, which allows us to export rich data reports from simulation results to PowerPoint slides and Excel tables, and then also Morpheus, which allows us to generate Maestro test benches in a standard way that would be compatible with data panels, right? So that they're basically, it sets it up in the format that the report generator is expecting. Yeah, the idea would be you would, create Morpheus test bench generator, run it, and then use that test bench to simulate, and then use data panels to create a report that you can just drop into your design review, so that you can have other designers review the results, right? And yeah, I mean, we especially if you're kind of doing the same results over a lot of different items, like different, let's say, ports on your design, or whatever the case may be. If you're iterating across something and producing a lot of the same information across that, then this can save you a lot of time, and also being able to just having a higher quality presentation, and you're also able to achieve consistency across designers and across design teams, because now you have the program generates it, so there's really reduces the variation in the results between different people. Yeah, the idea here was to build a library that can handle a lot of the skill and the interface of that with Python. So it has kind of a standard library of batteries included modules, a test framework modeled after PyTest, TOML config file reader and writer, based off the TOML standard, and then skill code packaging system. So based on this idea that you could create, it's better handled by Python, right? So Python's better at doing these high levels activities. So basically we're using existing Python environment managers to create a skill environment within that Python environment. And I'll show you how that works here in a minute. But then as part of that, you also just have to define skill++ modules and packages within skill itself. And then the way this works is it's kind of similar to Python in that there's kind of a top level import table. So it's just a skill table with each of the packages defined as a, well, here, actually, there's a good example on the GitHub. I'll show you guys. Let's see. So yeah, here's an example. So basically you have this import table, and you can import any of the modules that are added by any package into your current let statement. So then this module is going to be local to that let statement, right? And since this is skill++, it'll be local to this lexical scope. And then here you can see I'm defining a new module named string, or str in this case. It has two functions, mtp and string to boolean. And then what we do is we create a decomposed property list, or you can also use a table, either one, to basically package these together into a module. And then there's just a module function, so you can create a new module this way, and you pass it the symbol of the module, and then the actual module itself. And then you also can provide the project or the package that's with, or that's associated with. So in this case, it's a a part of the Virtue package. And then, yeah, you can also provide a description, which, yeah, in this case, I just put that at the top so it kind of documents itself. And so this describes, this is just some string functions in this case, simple case. So yeah, hopefully we can do this more interactive. So yeah, if you guys have any questions, just feel free to interrupt at any time. Yeah, then yeah, you can basically create a skill environment using Conda or pip Python environments. So you could either, I guess I would recommend using Conda just because it's easy to install any version of Python that you need. And then you can also have different environments with different versions of Python installed. And it also is a binary package manager, right? So if there's tools that need to be compiled, they have a lot of those already compiled and built into packages, so you can just install them directly. And then, yeah, but you could still use pip along with Conda, because all Conda is it's kind of like putting another layer on top of the pip environment, right? Because it's just taking care of the shell environment and the handling binary packages also, in addition to being able to install things into the same Python environment that pip would install them into, right? So, yep, and then it also has some support for skill bridge, and some of the Python functions use that interface to call skill, and it also has a GUI for just starting the skill bridge server as its menu. And then, like I was saying, it comes with a test framework, so based off of PyTest. So here you can see we have the test frameworks, the test module, and then we're gonna test the string package that we had just defined, and then we're also going to just import Virtue to get the current file path, really, and just in this case. So, yeah, we're going to create a test procedure called empty to test that MTP function we made earlier. So we're going to just check to make sure that when it's true, it's working, and then give it a false case, and then do the same thing here. And they're all just based off of a simple assert, right? There's no additional assert methods to learn. You can also still just do like a test for an error, right? So here we're just making sure that this is going to throw an error like we were expecting. And then at the end, you just tell it which test method you want to run, right? So you pass in the symbol and the test function itself, and then this helps you define it. And also, I think soon we're going to also add support so you can just send in the whole environment. So then it would go through and check and run any tests that start with test underscore. So then you don't have to necessarily call them out specifically. But this gives you a little more control, but it could be a little bit faster if you just want to run all of them just to hand it the environment. Then anything any of the test functions that are defined within this lexical scope would get ran. You just send it the file path to just so that it can identify which file each of these came from. Yeah, then if you run this in the CIW, you'll get a little report that just tells you, which ones passed and failed, and then at the end it will give you the total number of tests passed and failed. And you can also just run a whole directory of these test scripts. Yeah, you can install it using a couple different methods. Any questions so far?
I have a question, Curtis.
Yeah.
Since you have two languages in principle now, so you can implement each functionality in either Python or Skill in a way. How do you decide where do you implement it, in Python or Skill? How do you decide that independent on the function?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a general principle, we try to do as much in Python as possible, right? Because there's,
Yeah.
you know, it's a little bit higher level, and there's usually, you know, well, if you look at it, I mean, Skill is a very niche language, right? So if you're trying to do something, there's usually not an off-the-shelf solution. But if you look at Python, it's, you know, the most popular language in the world. Like, so let's say, you know, about 30% of people use, or, you know, it's about 30% of the development in the world. So, you know, if you go and look, there's probably already a solution for the issue that you're trying to face, right? So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that's usually the most productive way to do it. But you know, there's certain things that you just can't do with Python alone, right? Usually involving interacting with the Cadence database, or you know, some things are actually simpler with Skill. So yeah, that's when you'd have to go in and implement a skill function. And usually I would implement it as both a skill API and then also as a Python API, so you can, you know, handle it in both cases. Yeah.
So sometimes you implement it in both languages, the same procedure.
Yeah, and usually, you know, the main procedure will be on one side or the other, but they can call each other. So then I just write like a wrapper on the other side to you know, be able to call it. That makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, if you go here, there's an overview, documents, you know, how to install it, which we'll go over here in a minute. Yeah, it's just my computer. I don't know what's going on right now. Okay, there we go. All right, just a little hiccup. All right, so yeah, there's a standard library. We're working on kind of creating some API documentation. There's not much right now. If you just look at the source code, you can find some useful functions there. And then, yeah, there's that example script that we just went over for this. One of the neat features also is that in PyTest, you can just define a test fixture to, you know, set up a test just by declaring a parameter. So like if I wanted to, yeah, here's a good example. So here I'm just testing this temporary directory, and all I do is pass it temporary directory and then just make sure it exists. So this was just to demonstrate this temp directory test fixture, which sets up the test and then just, you know, returns the temp file path, and then the framework takes care of, you know, looking at the parameter name here and then matching it up with this function name that's in this fixtures table. So basically you just add this function, certain name, to the fixtures table, and then you can go in your test and just call it out by name. So yeah, you can add other test fixtures to this table too. And then yeah, there's a command line interface to it, and this is look at it here. So if we look at that, there's some help here directly in the command line, right? Here, I'll make this a little wider. Okay, so yeah, this is right now it's mostly focused on just doing the package management, but there could be other functions added, right? So you can check the version of Virtue at the moment, and then you can install some auto completion, and then access the help, and then there's 3 main commands right now. So one of those would be this virtue info command. And that's just going to print out some basic information about your environment. So it's going to, if you're in a conda environment, it'll print out the prefix or the path to the root of the conda environment. And then it'll print out, the version of Python installed in that current environment. And then it also prints out each of the skill environment initialization files, right? So there's 3 of these. There's the CDS init, which will load all of the packages installed into Cadence to the main, skill environment. Then the library manager itself has its own skill environment. So it has its own initialization file, which allows you to customize the library manager. So each package can basically customize the library manager and add whatever they want to the virtue menu, or they could also create their own menu if they had a lot to include or wanted to do that. And then there's the data.reg, which is the data registry for defining new view types within Virtuoso and new tools. So then the next one would be the list command. And so this is just going to list the existing Virtue packages. So here you can see I just have 2 installed. So I have the Virtue skill Python package, which is just called Virtue in the skill for skill, and it's version 0.3.2. And then Softworks has the same name in both, and it's version 0.3.0. And the only reason this is different than this one is because this is on pip, this was already taken, Virtue was already taken, so I had to use virtue-skill. Then the other command is this virtue install command, and it's going to go in and it's going to generate these installation files or these initialization files, and then point you to the path and give you kind of a little script to copy into your environment's initialization files, right? So that can vary depending on the environment you're in. So basically it's just going to get you to the point where you can copy paste this into there for each of these 3 different initialization file types. And then we can take a look at what one of these looks like here. So any questions so far on that, or how this is structured? So you can see right now we're in this conda environment. So if I do conda info, you'll see it's the same path that was displayed in the virtue one, in the virtue info. And yeah, the packages are just defined in here. So you can do conda list virtue and it'll come up with the conda package. And then also, I think if we do the same thing on pip, we should see the same thing also. Oops, sorry, I meant pip. Yeah. There's Softworks, and then, oh yeah, it's actually called virtue-skill, that's right. So yeah, you can see them in both environments, right? So conda takes care of the binary and shell environment, and then pip takes care of the the Python environment contained within the conda environment. So yeah, we do have kind of conda environment, then a pip environment, and then a skill environment. So just kind of 3 different layers here. Yeah, I think, well, we're going to look at one of those files. This, oops. Delete that guy. Yeah, it's just going to go in and generate this file when you call the virtue install. So actually, before we go into too much detail here, let's just go over the installation procedure, because this is part of what I was trying to do here, was making it easy to install packages and create different virtual environments. You can have different sets of packages in different that you could run by just changing environments and running them in that environment. So yeah, let's go back to the install here. maybe I'll just split the screen. So yeah, I guess step 0 is to make sure you have Mamba Forge or some sort of Conda or Mamba if it isn't already installed. It has a link to the installer. Just takes a minute or two to install, and then but you could also use, if you have a Conda, an existing Conda like you do in this cell environment, then just go ahead and use that. But yeah, there are a few advantages to kind of creating your own. But yeah, let's see. So then after that, you just create a new environment named Virtuoso. So if you have Anaconda-client package installed, then you can directly install it from the Anaconda cloud using this command. But if you don't have that installed, or if you need to edit the environment before you create it, then you can just download this YAML file and then just install based off of that YAML file. Why don't we just go ahead and take a look at that while we're talking. So here I downloaded it already. Well, I think it's called environment, but I renamed this one to Virtuoso to reflect the environment it makes. So yeah, it's a pretty simple file. It just has the name of the environment you're going to create, and then these are the kind of the package repositories. So in this case, there's this community-led organization called Conda Forge, and then there's kind of some defaults that are also provided. And then we have Virtue. So in this case, I just want the latest version. In this case, I'm calling out a specific version of Virtuoso. So in this case, 0.3.0, which happens to be the latest version also, but I just wanted to kind of show this. And then same thing with SkillBridge, I'm calling out a specific version for that. Also for Python, it's going to choose the latest version of 3.9, or I guess maybe not, but well, I should say it'll probably choose the latest one, but it has a solver, so it's going to try and solve the environment to make sure that everything is consistent according to the requirements of all these packages. And then it's going to install Conda, and then Mamba is a much faster version of Conda that is rewritten in C++ and does a lot of its operations in parallel. So anytime you want to use Mamba because it'll be much faster than Conda, especially when solving the environment, and it has better error messages if it has an issue with the environment, like if some packages aren't consistent in their requirements, then it will give you a more clear message. And then, I just want to make sure we have the latest version of Git and pip. Any questions about that? So the main things we're looking for here are these 3 packages, right? And then these are for supporting those.
One question.
Yeah.
How much of the functionality is kind of dependent on the Cadence version? What is if the Cadence version is older, or then it will change? Is there a lot of, do you see a lot of bugs that can happen due to that, or is it pretty stable?
Well, we've been using it on 6.17 and 6.18. It's not going to work on IC5, I don't think, but as long as you're in the 6.1 range, it should be fine. But I think, that'd be something where we'd have to have more people test it if they're interested in working on different versions. Those are the only 2 that we've used it with.
Okay.
Do you guys use older versions or newer versions, or?
No, we are using the newest version, but I think not everybody is using always the newest version since it's expensive license also.
And I mean, certainly we could talk about it, and if we see issues, maybe there's ways we could address those. Okay, so this is how you define your environment, and you could probably just use it directly as it is. But then, all you have to do is activate the newly created Conda environment and then install skill environment into the Python environment by calling that virtue install. And then it will give you the initialization scripts, and then it has some hints here on how to install them. So how to install the library manager customizations and the view type registry. So depending on your environment, that may or may not be set up in the best way already. So yeah, Cadence provides some support. So there's some links to Cadence support about how to do that. But yeah, yeah, yeah.
Hi, Curtis. I have a question about how is the process of doing some circuit with Virtu?
So okay. I guess it's more of a support library, right? So it's meant just to support these other projects that actually directly involve working with circuits, right? So whether that be this to present the results of a simulation, or also this test bench generator, right? So it just makes it much easier to install these packages and switch between versions and provide some software functionality to develop those. Does that make sense? And to get quickly started with them. Yeah. It doesn't require any sort of special privileges. You can do everything as just a regular user. And yeah, it also has. Does that make sense? Or does that answer your question? Like who asked the question?
Achilles, I think, asked the question.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like a glue glue that allows us to communicate more easily the Cadence tools with these other projects.
Yeah. So if you're trying to develop a tool that needs to interact with Cadence, then this might be a good way to do it. Yeah, we can get into more details of how these packages are defined. I think I've already shown you the skill++ modules with that first example. You can do it as a DPL module or as a table. And then, yeah, it allows you to, initialize the skill and customize the library manager. For example, here's the Virtu menu by itself and has the start skill bridge server, you can go to the help, and then can also, like the Softworks adds a menu that, can start VS Code. Yeah, then you can also add custom cell views. Each package could add a custom cell view or a Cadence library. So yeah, part of the way it does this is it uses a library called Pluggy. So it basically allows you to register Virtu packages and include their skill packages in the environment. So basically you define a few hooks. So yeah, you can see how this looks. So Virtu itself defines some hooks. So basically you just define something like this where you could recreate this for a new package, and allows you to basically add, here's the skill initialization path for my package, and then you register your package name, your Python package name, and your skill package name, and in this case, the CDS lib manager initialization file. And then there's one additional one that Virtu doesn't take advantage of, which is this reg data red path. And if anybody is curious about that, I can show the example from Softworks, which does use this to register the new cell view types. So yeah, that's basically how packages can add themselves to the Virtue environment. Any questions about that? Yeah.
Yeah. How does your top level script looks like? No, at the end you have a script, create that, show that. Is that top level script in Python then?
Yeah. Yep. Here we can go ahead and look at the source code if you want. So basically, if you go in here, there's an API module, and this just defines it in Python, so you could call the same functions in Python. So like that info one, you could get back a dictionary with that same information in it as the CLI info command. And then we also have the list command, which is, since list is a built-in function, I use list packages here, which gives you information about each package that's installed in the virtual environment and is registered with it. And then you can also run the same install command from within Python. And then, yeah, so those are the three currently the three commands that are available through both the Python API and through the command line interface. So if you want to call it from Python, you'd use those functions. But if you wanted to call it from the command line, I use a package called typer to define the which is based off of click, and it's just an easy way to make a command line interface. And then I also use this package called rich, which just does a good job of formatting the output. So it, for example, it makes those tables that we saw, and you can add emoji like you saw in the package or the list command, and it has a lot of good kind of user interface functions. So that's been helpful. So yeah, then yeah, go ahead.
So in principle, every function you can run either from Python or from the CLW from Cadence. Is that correct?
Sorry, here, this one, well, what I'm talking about right now is the command line interface, right? Not in the CIW, but just in the shell.
In the shell, yeah, okay, I understand.
Yeah, so yeah, you could also kind of make the same functions in Cadence too, certainly, and yeah, and obviously call Python from Cadence pretty easily. So, yeah, this main part just defines the -- version option on the main virtue command, and then I also have the info command, and then the list command, and then the install command, like we demonstrated previously in the CLI here. So yeah, two short modules define the kind of top level interface here. Any other questions there? And then, yeah, you can see here are the initialization files for Virtue itself, where in this case, it's initializing the library manager, right? And setting up the menus for Virtue. And then in this case, it's the CDS init, and it's pulling each of the skill packages within Virtue and loading those in the order defined here. So yeah, then those get registered through the plugin interface like we showed before. So basically, I just register those functions with the plugin interface, and then that allows the Virtue install command to just call them, so that you don't have to worry about installing anything or setting it up. It just handles it for you once they've been registered. And so if we look at, well, let's look at another example of, this is the main library, right? But of client library. So Softworks, this is a library or a project that I wanted to use Virtue with, right? And so basically on the Python side, all you have to do is define this Virtue Softworks module, and it just defines those same hooks that we just talked about. So you just import Virtue and then define the hooks that were defined in Virtue. So you, again, just give it the Python package name, the skill package name, the skill initialization paths, and all three of the three different types of initialization paths are provided by the package itself. And then, yeah, those can just be based off of these import lib resources that come from the package, right? And then you just get the path from that, and then you can pass that to Virtue. And then, yeah, I mean, if we're getting into too much detail, you guys are welcome to interrupt me. I'd be happy to answer any questions or whatever.
I have a question.
Go
Is
ahead.
that this kind of tools like Softworks that is made to generate documentation is tightly coupled with Cadence Virtuoso? Talking that I don't know, maybe there's an interface stuff, and after that we can make things more abstract, maybe.
Yeah. Okay. So you're saying, what about these other tools, right, that exist, not just Cadence? So Virtue itself is pretty well tied to Cadence, right? Because the skill language
Perfect.
is, that. Same with data panels. Its main purpose is to add, these new types of cell views to Cadence, to the, the Virtuoso environment. Or sorry, I was talking about Softworks, excuse me. And then data panels, on the other hand, doesn't necessarily have to come from Cadence, actually. And the way we're setting it up is that there's a data layer that you can basically define different data sources. So you can get data from, so the data layer, it just takes an input file and converts it to a pandas table, right? So you can think of just like a kind of like a CSV file in memory that has a really nice API. So it has all sorts of functions really well defined to transform that data and, post-process it and group it the way you want, right? So there's kind of like there's a well-defined interface that you can, create a new data reader and read it into a pandas table in the same format and then at that point, it doesn't matter what your data source was, right? So you could import data from ADS or from, a CSV file, like if you're running lab results, or, just depending on what you want to do, you just re-implement the data reader would be the idea. So you could also create a similar extension to extend data panels to, your functionality. And that was a part of the motivation too, was we need a good way to extend these, because the main goal here is to work on the kernel, like the core part of these libraries, but then each individual user is going to have kind of their own IP that they can't share with others, right? So like we can work together on doing a lot of the core functionality, but right, each person is going to want to customize in a way that they won't be able to share, right? Because as they're working on a specific IP, at least they can't, because we can work together on, there's certain areas I think are really important for us to work together on, like putting these core libraries together, and then there's certain areas where the circuit IP itself will be more difficult to work together on and probably needs to be protected, or does need to be protected. And those basically you just make an extension and work on that part for your own organization, right? And then, but at the same time, working on that core, kernel will, allow all of us to have more time to, implement or like focus on the areas where we can best provide value for our teams, right? So we're not just reinventing the wheel at 3 different organizations for, creating these sorts of, software libraries. We can focus on the actual circuit that we're trying to work on. All right, a little, I guess, maybe we'll get away from some philosophy here and kind of look at some of these a little closer. So like, yeah, the Softworks library, like I was saying, it's, I think we should be able to go to their docs, to our docs. Yeah, this one is for, well, maybe I'll pause for a sec. Was there anything else we wanted to cover about Virtue before we kind of move over to first example client, or yeah, library that's built with Virtue? But yeah, there's some overview here. It also has a TOML config file reader, so you could read them in and read them out, and they're more of a human readable, config file that you can also use in different ways. There's a reference section, and then, well, this might be important to take a look at. So if you're interested in contributing to Virtue, you can go here to the development section, and there's a getting started section. So it'll show you how to kind of get a development installation set up, which is similar to a user setup, except that you want to make sure you do a editable pip install so that you can update your code and have it see that immediately without having to reinstall the package. And then that's about it. And then we use the pre-commit hooks. So some Git hooks from this library called pre-commit. So you probably want to install those also to help filter out any errors before you even commit them. Yeah, and then there's some recommended extensions if you're using the VS Code IDE. And then just some guidelines on how to write high quality skill code. Just a few hints. And well, actually, maybe we could talk about Conda Forge a little bit. So one of the ideas was to basically, well, how should we do this? Yeah, one of my original ideas, oh, it's not. Yeah, one of the original ideas was to basically, there's this existing Conda Forge organization that hosts packages and handles all the, the continuous integration of them. So for example, basically what you do is you just submit a recipe for creating a Conda package to this organization just through a GitHub commit or pull request. And then, for example, if we look at the Virtue package, so this is just the feed, they call them feedstocks, but they're just recipes for creating the package. So you can submit them, and then they handle all the CI and CD. So build your package based off the recipe. Whenever you commit it, or sorry, whenever you release it, in my case, mine set up so that whenever it gets released to PyPy, it will it'll also release to Conda Forge. So then it'll just automatically see that it has a new package in PyPy, and then has a little bot that'll send me a pull request saying, hey, we got to update this. And so I can double check it and just hit some or accept or merge, and then it will then release it to their package repository hosted on the Anaconda cloud. So if I click here, you should see this is the actual package being hosted on the Anaconda cloud. And this just takes care of all the CI/CD and automation. So then, yeah, I just submit this little one line a couple files about the recipe, telling it how to build it and the requirements for it, and then some metadata. Yeah, the idea here was to create a set of packages so that we could, have these environments, right? So one would be, I've already added the Virtue library and the skill bridge, and we still need to do libpsf, which is for reading results using an open source library. There's also a PSF reader from Cadence. If you have access to that, I'm working with them right now to get it posted on Cadence online support. And so that should include some Conda pip packages, so you can easily install that too. And then also we've been working on kind of an open source environment also. So that would be the schematic editor, and we already have this magic up on Conda, and a few of these are already up on there. And then Yeah, so this is the idea here was just to build these packages so that we can easily install them into our new circuit design environments. That was that. Any questions about that or comments?
Curtis, one question. How many users do you have outside Skyworks?
Well, we really only open sourced this in like the last maybe even the last month, so I don't think we have a lot yet. So yeah, that's why I'm giving this presentation as part of kind of going around and you know, doing some advertising to see who would be interested in using these. But yeah, we've used it for a few years in Skyworks and it works really well. So hopefully we can get you guys on, or get the community on, benefiting like we have. So
and how is it with the free silicon modules? How do you use them? For example, Morpheus is to create Maestro test benches. No, how do you translate that into the free silicon environment?
So yeah, I think it's really easy with data panels, right? Like I said, you can create a new data set reader that would convert it to the same format, and then everything else would be the same from there. So you basically have to add that little module to, just read whatever the data format is that you are using and just read it into a pandas table. So that one's the easy one. Morpheus, I'm not sure yet. I mean, certainly if there was a certain format that the test benches need to be in, you could, generate it in that format too. I guess I haven't put any effort in to try that yet, but I think there is ways we could, generate test benches in a different format. Yeah, in this case, we're just focused on Maestro because that's how we do it. But yeah, there certainly could extend it to other simulators.
Curtis, I have a question too, also regarding the open source tools that you kind of introduced. So how much, or how many of these tools do you actually use, and where? This does not have direct, it's not direct question to the script and that you are presenting, but I'm just curious. Where where do you see the benefit in actually wrapping also open source tools, not only Cadence, with this whole combination? Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, to be honest, I mean, yeah, I mostly use Cadence, and that's why a lot of these are focused on that. But yeah, I can definitely see the benefits of the open source tools, especially if you're, a student, you want to, tape out on some of these, especially the Google, MPWs that they have. And, I certainly thought about submitting my, doing a little studying and coming up with a design to submit to the MPWs. Yeah, I think the idea was just to broaden the community, right? So there's also a lot of people who can only use those because they don't have access to Cadence. So if we can also get them on board, then we can all work together on that kernel. Like I said before, there's a whole lot that could be shared between them because maybe the input and the output formats are different, but the core functionality of the library should be the same. So I think it wouldn't be too much harder to support the open source tools in addition to the Cadence tool set. So those are my thoughts. Yep. Yeah. So hopefully that'll be a part of what we do next week is, get some more experience with using the open source tools is what I'm hoping when I come join you guys next week. Let's see. Yeah, any other questions about that? Then, actually, I want to cover one more thing. So yeah, if we go to Virtue, we have, the issues. If you see, you know, an area where we could improve, that you'd like an additional feature, you can request a feature. And if you see a bug, you can report it here. And there's just some templates that you can use that'll help you write it up well so that we can, you know, quickly handle those. And then there's also this discussion section. And so here's where you can, when you release, so if you go to, I guess, hopefully some of you are familiar with GitHub. On here, it'll have each of the releases. So you can see I have 3 releases. Oh, no, I have more than 3. Several releases. And then, yeah, it'll have the change log. It has a nice way to generate that based off the commits that you make. And they links directly to the commit, or sorry, to the pull request. And then you can look at the full change log between them. So this will do a diff of them. And then if you go to discussions, it also has an option to post the same change log to discussions to make an announcement. And there's a Q&A section. So you can kind of come in here and ask questions and start the discussion. I think Thomas is had emailed me a question, is going to start this with also posting the question here. And then, yeah, there's a few other options like creating a poll or, you know, doing some brainstorming here. So this could be a good area to work on.
Curtis, do you provide also some tutorials? Like, for example, you have a Jupyter notebook to create a Maestro test bench with Morpheus, something like that?
Yeah, so we're currently working on open sourcing that. But yeah, on the closed source version, yeah, we had some tutorials that went through, you know, some example test benches. Yep, exactly. And provided an example script. And that's especially important because the way that, well, actually, this might be a good segue into Softworks. So a big part of this is that we wanted to, you know, make it easier for even regular designers to make it more accessible to the average designer, right? So we wanted to make it as easy as possible to write, you know, a simple run script in Python. And then all you have to do is go in here and you know, go to the same new menu, select Python module view, and then it'll create a new Python module in here. If you know, double click on it, it'll open in VS Code with the interpreter already selected, and then you could just hit run, and it'll run that example code. Well, I mean, okay, I guess I skipped a step there. You'd go to the documentation of, you know, the library that you're trying to run. Like, for example, for the test bench generator, there's an example script there, and these example scripts are really simple. They're just one dictionary with a few parameters. Like, here's the, you know, the name of the test bench I want to generate, the library name, and, you know, maybe a couple options related to the test bench. And then it just calls a single function, and just, you know, a single function call at the end, and that's how it runs it. So yeah, you just copy paste the template from an example test bench, update the parameters according to your need, and then hit run. And then it'll, you know, you go back to your library manager to that cell that you specified, and your test bench is right there ready for you to simulate with. So yeah, it supports, you know, Python modules, and you can create templates within here. So one of the things that we haven't gotten to yet, but I'd like to see is basically, you know, you can have a little library of those templates. So instead of going to the documentation and copy pasting the examples, you can just already have some existing templates. So you can think like you have a folder, you just drop the templates in there, and it could pick it up from there to, you know, create the new example scripts. And so yeah, you can do that with Python. There's also Jupyter notebooks, which will open in VS Code also with good support. And then skill code, so skill and skill++ will open up in the native, you know, skill IDE within Cadence. And then if you open up a TOML or a YAML file, you can see those are also supported, and they'll open in VS Code with, you know, nice auto completion or, you know, highlighting. So you can also include like a schema, right? So if you had a specific type of config file you need the user just to fill out, you could have you provide a JSON schema, and then you can have it do auto completion using that, right? So then it kind of guides the user in how to fill out the config file and can check to see if they made mistakes in it. So yeah, it supports both TOML and YAML config files depending on your use case. And then it also supports Markdown, so that you can just have some documentation in there, or have a README, for example. And like I said, Jupyter notebooks, in case you want to do some experiments, or if you want to use that as your user interface. We've experimented with that before. And then you can do HTML documentation. So this could be the actual documentation files themselves, or it could just be a link to it, so that when you double click on this, it opens that URL. So you can just create a simple HTML file that redirects to whatever URL you want to document either the generator itself, or even the documentation for a cell, just depending. Or if you have some sort of IP library, you can link to that. And then yeah, we also support documentation views. So usually this involves including the PPTX, which is kind of the source file, so that future designers could go in and edit this, but also a PDF, just because it's a little more portable and it's easier to view in Linux, right? So that you can see it well formatted, or at least a little bit better. I mean, the PPTX is fine, but it's a little bit better in PDF. Let's see, do we cover everything? And of course, Excel tables to whatever you need for the documentation, for like a compliance matrix, or for just a data set, or like input vectors maybe. Yeah, and all of these can be added right along with a schematic and symbol template, or any sort of native Virtuoso views. So yeah, and then there's just a table outlining the view type, the expected extension, some of the current editors that are supported, and it could certainly be extended to support other editors. And then a short description. This is just the GUI that's used. So once you go to new, if it's a documentation view, it'll have a second GUI after the standard Cadence GUI, where you have two options. You can either create a new cell, which will just import a template, or you can import an existing file. So if you already have your review done, you just select the path to it, and then it'll import that. Yeah, the installation is pretty simple. It's, like I said, you just install it into that Virtue framework. So as long as it's part of your definition of your environment, then that's all you got to worry about. And I guess the other thing you have to worry about is just having those editors installed, because it's not going to install them for you. Actually, I should leave this VS Code here, because that, yeah, that's something that you'd want to install, should have installed. On some of these may have editors available through Conda. I guess I haven't tried to look, just because these are what we already had installed. And actually, I think I may have converted to Firefox as the PDF viewer, because that can work too.
Curtis,
Yep.
Let's say you want to integrate that into your Virtuoso environment. You kind of have to copy something in the CDS init, or do you have a kind of manual for doing that? Because only updating my Python environment, it will not show up in my Cadence environment.
Yeah, all you have to do is install into your Python environment, and then run the virtue install command, and then that's all you have to do. And then it'll be, well, you have to restart Cadence, or yeah, that's it.
And
yeah,
and I give virtue then the path of my Cadence environment, and it will then do the necessary steps.
Let's go back to virtue. So yeah, the way it works is that when you call virtue install, it generates the the initialization file for all of the packages installed in your Python environment, right? So each Python package registers its initialization file with Virtue, and then Virtue just adds that when you call Virtue install, then you it just installs that in your environment, so you don't have to do anything else. Yeah. So you do a conda install and then a Virtue install, or a pip install and then a Virtue install, and that's it. And you currently you just restart Cadence, that it reinitializes the Virtue initialization file, right? But I think in the future we could certainly add a feature where it just reloads that without restarting Cadence, right? Or reloads new modules, something like that. So then you don't have to restart Cadence. But yeah, right now you just close your session and restart it. Yeah, that makes sense? Or
yeah, kind of. So the only like perhaps this is a stupid question, but I mean my CDS init needs to be extended, no? There needs to be some more Python code in that CDS init.
So yeah,
at what step is that been done?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, if we go back to the installation, so when you install Virtue the first time, that's the only time you have to edit your CDS init. So what you do is you call this, so you set up your conda environment, right? And then you call Virtue install. And when you call that, which I can do here again, because you can call it as many times as you want, because it's just going to recreate the same files. So when you do that, it actually goes in and it creates each of these files. And you can see those files are stored in the Virtue Python path, right? So this is where Virtue is installed. So it just created these guys. And these ones contain the links to all of the Virtue conda packages, right? So you can see it picked up that I have Virtue and Softworks installed, right? So then this is how it's doing that. So this handles the changing of that CDS init environment, right, for you.
Okay, so does it mean in principle it creates a Cadence environment? It creates this folder where I launch Cadence from?
No, it doesn't create the folder you launch Cadence from. It just it leaves it up to you to make sure that this gets called from your .cds init. You just copy paste this into your .cds init, which calls that file I just showed you. Yeah.
Okay.
And then that file I showed you gets updated anytime you call Virtue install, right? And it'll recreate those files. And if you had changed the Python environment, then it'll change this file right here. That makes sense?
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. So then, yeah, everything's kind of handled on the Python side. And once you only install it once into your CDS init file. And you could think if you had some users, you could just install it in the site CDS init and take care of it for all the users. Yeah, and you could certainly, one of the features I hope to add is just have this based off of some, environment variables, especially if you're in a conda environment, you could make all of this up until the name of the conda environment based off that conda prefix. So then if you change conda environments, this part here won't change. It's just this part, right? So then you change to a new environment, you will have the, you don't have to change your installation into the .cds init. All you do is your conda prefix will be different, so it'll just pick it up automatically. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But yeah, we can cover that later. Yeah, it's the same for all three of these different types of files, right? Basically, you just does the same thing. Yeah, that's how anything that you see in here under, not Virtue list will be a part of both your Python environment and your skill environment, right? So there's a Python package, skill package. They're both initialized and ready for you to use. Yeah. You just have to have the conda environment activated when you start Virtuoso. So you just do conda activate and then Virtuoso, and it loads it. Yep. Or in the case of pip, I guess it'd be, the virtual environment. You activate that and then you start Virtuoso. Okay. So yeah, then yeah, like I was saying, there's also data panels where yeah, you just you try and generate these reports, right? So right now I'm working on releasing this open source, but you basically go in here, you select a history item. So yeah, go to history, select the the simulation result you want to document, and then you go down here to run data panels report, and then we're running on this data set. And my basic plan is to put together a basic example based off of like a common source amplifier and the RC filter that we can use just to demonstrate it, and show the core functionality here. But yeah, we've been using it for several years, and it has really helped us move much faster. You can imagine, some of our complex designs can take as much as a day or two just to put the report together, and then it's still not as as well presented as it could be. And so, in order to we're moving towards a fully automated flow, but until then we still have a human in the loop. And even while we're developing these generators, you have to have a human in the loop to develop them and verify them. So this can really speed up that process so that we can iterate much faster. So instead of and it a lot of times you can't do it on your own, right? So you have to have a good way to share with other designers your results. So you can imagine if you're working and you have to if you can share your results and present them well much more often, then you can actually get more and better feedback from your peers. Yeah, so that's a big motivation here, part of the motivation. Yeah, I'm working on releasing and updating what we have now, and certainly if anybody's interested in working on this with me, I'd be happy to talk with you. Yeah, we could. Yeah. But yeah, I think this is kind of in the priority. So I kind of put Softworks together as the first package just because it's the simplest one to kind of demonstrate how it works with Virtue, and then data panels is the next priority, since I think that provides a lot of value for what it does, and it can be definitely support different input types, whether that be from open source tools or from lab data or from Cadence or from ADS. You should be able to support any type, just convert it into the same type of pandas table and then reuse the rest of it. And it has another library, like a companion one, that's called scikit report, and it just takes in a standardized Pydantic model and just creates different export views based off of that. So like you could think of it as exporting a compliance matrix to both Excel table and to a PowerPoint table, and then maybe another export view type might be like a CSV file for that same table, just presenting in different formats. Yep. That's kind of on the other side. And in the middle, we have these things called panels, which allow you to iterate and parameterize your slides, right? So you can think of a panel as being one slide, but it could also be a set of slides, right? So you might iterate over, I don't know, if you have let's say you have a filter with multiple inputs. You could, iterate over each of those inputs and show the same, frequency response for each of them and present them in exactly the same way. It makes it really easy to compare them, and especially since it comes out in standardized format, you can easily compare across projects and across designers. Yeah. and across, you know, different inputs or outputs or, you know, different settings of if your device is configurable. Yeah.
And Curtis,
Sorry, yeah, I'm
said that
talking about data panels. Yep.
You said you're still working on these features, but in principle, what you just showed, these features, they are available. If I would download it now, I would be able to use them, or they're still in the process of being finished.
We have all these features in the closed source version. The problem is that it's very intertwined with our IP, so we can't release how we simulate our circuits, right? So right now it's very entwined with that, so we have to separate out the kernel from the you know, Skyworks IP. So that's the challenge, and it actually takes quite a bit of work if you didn't design it ahead of time with this in mind, right? Yeah.
Yeah, this is the question that I had: how general is applicable to a different kind of methodology, also in different company.
Yeah.
So, what would you like? Let's say if you kind of downloaded from Conda, connected to your Cadence environment, which would be the features that, in order to test it out, what can be tested out on a different?
I think you should be able to use all the features here eventually, probably within the next, certainly within the next year. But yeah, currently we're just working on that data layer, you know, converting it to a common format for different data types right now. And so, and then we also have kind of that scikit report is another library that's has some basic features there. We can go into that if you want. But yeah, it's still being put together, I guess is the answer. But yeah, it should be. We're actively working on getting it released. So, and I have an intern starting here this fall and some I think some other support for it too. So yeah.
Let me know. I really would like to try it out, to test it.
Yeah. Curtis, I have a question for you regarding in part what Mario already mentioned. So your plan is to come next week to Linz, and I know that you already had some discussions with Thomas. So ideally, you know, you already have access to our servers, which I could see that part of it was actually from SDF flow that we had. So
yeah.
do you think that during the next week there will be, you know, a possibility that already some parts, you know, of this, what you presented and you're working on, could be a bit kind of decoupled from the, you know, the way you design and, you know, your internal procedures, such that, how to put it, that not only, like, let's say, connecting to the framework, but also releasing it separately has a benefit, because this is like a different design environment, different rules. In a way, it's also a test how ready your repos are, isn't it? Or am I maybe, you know, seeing it from the wrong perspective?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, because part of the goal here was to make, or to, you know, lower the bar for entry by making it really easy to install these tools, right? So currently Virtue is very easy to install into your environment, and I didn't see any issues. Softworks has a couple little hiccups that I'm seeing right now with how it's getting the templates for the views. So I think that should be easy to work out. I think it's just a small environment issue that we can work out. So these two right here, the first two items in the list are Virtue, I think, is completely ready. I think anybody could use that right now. Softworks, I think we have, you know, within the next week, I think we can work this out. So definitely by the end of the meeting next week, this will be working perfectly, I think. Data panels, I think, is going to take a little longer. So I think maybe in the spring, they'll have that working so that people can just download it and start using it right away. And then Morpheus is, well, it just depends on a few things about how much support we're going to get. So yeah, certainly if there's people interested in helping, I can put together some issues and point you to them if you're interested in helping accelerate the development. Yeah. So I think there are things that you guys can help with. I think some of it is just me, converting it, but also there's some areas that we want to make improvements even to compared to the existing closed source design. Yeah, especially with data panels, one of the things that we're working on is, like Ben kind of hinted at, is that in our current version, it's pretty specific to a specific test bench, right? So you basically have a standardized test bench, and then you can create a data panel report, but you have to know how to code in Python to do it. And you can basically, create new instances of each panel and build your report that way. But one of our goals is instead of doing that, we're going to basically make a config file where you can define these panels. So then each panel will be able to be parameterized as part of that config file. So that kind of gives the user more flexibility to update it, while still giving you the more powerful option of, you could still write some custom Python code to include it. So you could imagine if you had a config file where you just had each panel that is going to be defined in your report, or you could think of it as a slide or set of slides that are related, then you could parameterize that, or you could just, write one that just, handles a very specific case depending on your need. The idea here would be to release some general purpose ones such that it's on its own very useful. And so yeah, part of the idea is that within, the way it works is that within the Maestro test bench, you can basically name each of your outputs, right? So then you can call them by name, but actually within your test bench, it can map it to the specific, net that you're trying to plot or a specific equation that you're using. And so there's different ways to write it. But yeah, certainly we'll have to, put up some tutorials on how to put together a config file for a report to define a new report. So yeah, I think I have a little bit of work to do just to, write out some of the roadmap we need to do. But yeah,
Thanks, Frederick.
that's the idea. Any questions on that? I know it's probably quite a bit to ingest at once, but that's kind of an overview. Yeah, and so like I was saying, as part of data panels, you have kind of the output side. So the idea here was, I think this could be, more generally usable by a larger community. So basically anybody who's, needs to create a technical report could use this library to do their exports, right? And it could support different views of the same data and present it well, in a PowerPoint format, in Excel, or we've also had a Qt GUI, so you can quickly look at your data and it can be more interactive than these other formats. And then you could think of other export formats that could be supported by this library. So yeah, the initial plan is to target the slides first. This is kind of the order of priority about what we're trying to target with this. So. Yeah, that gives you an overview of Cascode Labs and what we're working on. And if you,
I have a question about the Viperforge.
Yes.
I don't know how much, I think it was not yet covered, but do you have examples where you have multiple generators, perhaps interdependent? Do you deploy them also with Viperforge, for example, if you have a higher level design, reusing a lower level design? And then perhaps topics like, I mean, the dependencies, I think it's of course modeled with the Viperforge, but does it also involve, for example, parameter passing or any tooling around these, or do they just have to, does it just deal with deployment aspects and so
no.
I mean the interdependencies between your generators that you're using, you will have dependencies like, for example, topics like parameter passing, like perhaps have you got an example, for example, two dependent like generators and how they and how they would be deployed with Viperforge?
Yeah, I think it has a lot of features that would be helpful in that scenario. For example, you're talking about, working with dependencies. So as a dependency solver, so I could kind of, if you lay out the requirements of it, it can, figure out which packages it needs and add that to your environment, right? And then, see, it is more high level, so it's not going to, take care of, like you're saying, parameter passing or anything like that, but it does offer a virtual environment, right? So you can imagine if you needed to run one generator with a certain environment or like tool set, like one generator, if it had to use Python 3.7 because of a certain library, you could do that in one Conda environment. And then if you had another generator, you could easily have it run in, a 3.9 environment or any type of package that it might be dependent on. You could basically create, each one could have its own virtual environment. Yep. So each tool or each generator could have its own environment.
And of course, if the lower level generators, you depend on a certain version, I suspect this is also easily modeled with these version dependencies between those generator packages, so to say. But it focuses on the deployment aspect and has not so much knowledge about, let's say, the structures and parameters and so on of generators, if I understand correctly.
That's correct. Yeah, and I don't have an example of using it specifically with the generator, so that's something certainly we could discuss. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And so to be clear, that's more of just a general Conda thing, right? For Conda environments, whereas Viperforge is just a group to generate Conda packages to put into Conda Forge, which is just an organization that handles kind of the open source packages and doing the some of the grunt work to make those available broadly.
Okay, understood.
But yeah, like if you look at how we use it internally, you can basically create your own internal repository so that you can have your own private Conda repo too, and you can just call that, add that channel as an option to get the packages, right? So then you can have your own, private packages also. Just, it's pretty easy to set up. You just put it into a folder and you can just give it the path, or then if you have a lot of people using it, you can just serve that over to HTTP server and use that URL. So, yeah, pretty handy.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
But yeah, if you guys are interested, you just go to cascodelabs.org and then, or to the GitHub. So yeah, you can go to our GitHub page and has links to each of the repos and their documentation. Yeah, I also think an important part of this is just make sure that our libraries are well documented, and so we can easily onboard people. So what I've been using is just Sphinx to generate these, and it's worked pretty well. Certainly, there's still some room for improvement. Maybe have some tutorials or more examples or whatever. But yeah, glad you're here.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, Curtis. Thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering, so you can open the you can open Python code with the from inside Virtuoso with Softworks, right?
Yes,
So
into VS Code. Yeah.
how exactly do you run them? I may have missed that part. So you still use an external terminal?
You can just run them directly in VS Code. So the way it works is
All
that it
right.
actually sets up a user workspace and then adds kind of the config files to that workspace. And then it, in our case, there's certain libraries that we have with each project. So it basically creates a symbolic link to those so that they're within that user workspace so that you can directly access those libraries within VS Code too. So you can imagine if you, well, here, I can probably just open up a version of VS Code here. Just give me 1 sec. Yeah, so this is kind of my skill development workspace here. It'll take 1 second to open. Well, I may not demonstrate this, but oh well, this might work okay. So yeah, you can imagine here you could have a symbolic link to the actual Cadence library. So then you have the option to either use the library manager to navigate to the cell, or you can navigate within here once this is open. But yeah, the initial entry point is through the library manager to select the you want to open the view. So yeah, then you just have it in here and it'll automatically add, for example, it'll add the .vs code folder with some, so it creates this workspace and it adds a template with some, extensions that we think they might need. And then it also has some settings set up. So you could have the settings pointing to a certain Python interpreter for that workspace so that they don't have to set up the. Did I answer your question?
Yes,
Or
thanks.
Okay.
Yeah. So that makes sense to me now. So in terms of a Mosaic framework based workflow with the tasks and stuff, do you think Virtu and Softworks is it ready to say, for example, have a complete workflow where you run a task, generate some schematic, and then run a test bench of that schematic, and then you generate results from Spectre, and then you export that and access it through the Python code of the tasks as well?
Yep. Yeah, certainly. So yeah, I mean that isn't, yeah, basically what you would have is you'd have your should I say this? Yeah, you just have your your Virtuoso environment already set up, and yeah, you could just run it through this. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it shouldn't be a problem. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm hoping next week I can get a little more experience with that, with the MOSAIC framework, and yeah, work a little more with it. So I don't see any issue with that. Nothing preventing me from doing that.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. Do you think because these existing generators, right? Like for example, I think Lego 2 uses the bag server that's present in bag 2, and Infineon uses something that's called DF2 bridge and stuff like that. So do you think we'll have to choose Vert2 over those, or do you think it can coexist with that backend already?
Well, so I think we can create another Conda or even Virtue package for the bag server, right? So Virtue isn't that entwined with Skill Bridge, and you can use both. There's nothing preventing you from running both. So I see that as an issue. I think hopefully on the DF2 bridge end, we can somehow get the interfaces to look similar so that in either case, whether you're using DF2 bridge or skill bridge, you can, you know, once you have your workspace, you could use that, or, you know, pass that to either, you could use it with the same set of functions, right, is my hope, so that the interface is the same, and even though their communication might be different and some of the other items might be a little bit different, we can still as much as possible make them work together, right? So yeah, so we don't have to repeat ourselves or do things twice, like you're saying. But yeah, so currently we've just been using skill bridge, but yeah, certainly, I mean, a lot of the core functionality would be useful in either case, and they can coexist. Same problem, I think. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. That makes sense. Thanks for the presentation.
Yeah, I do think there's some testing there, right? I think that's something we should try out. But yeah, I don't see any major roadblocks.
And Curtis, when you look in BAG, now they also have this kind of skill bridge and skill functionality, but everything is totally wrapped in Python. In principle, you don't touch skill at all, and everything is kind of executed from Python. You don't see actually the skill behind, which is so you have all the functionality that you also kind of have in your, but probably not you have to extend the skill functionality in Python, but in principle you don't necessarily need to have skill, since it's a little bit cumbersome to create code for skill. Why did you decide to go these both ways, that you kind of you can access Python functionality from skill and skill functionality from Python, and also your GUI is in skill, not in Python? What was the reasoning for not doing it more into the Python area, and are still pretty skill heavy?
I guess, yeah, I think there are just some areas where it can be easier if you're doing a lot of low-level functionality, just to write some of the functionality in skill and then provide a high-level API to Python, depending on your familiarity with skill, right? But also, I guess is also an attempt to, or yeah, it is also in order to kind of support, you know, existing design flows that may, you know, design tools and flows that are based on skill, right? So we have some legacy tools that we still have to interact with that are that way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. It's kind of a legacy thing, no? Because the thing is, to debug and support skill code, it takes 3 to 4 times more effort than do the same for Python code.
Yeah, and so yeah, that's part of Virtue, right? Is to you know, decrease that gap, right? Because it's making Python or skill more Pythonic, right? So it has some of the features that Python have, like this import system, and is very similar, or you know, is more similar to Python, and so is this skill test framework based off of PyTest, and it uses, you know, the Python packaging manager as a skill package manager. So, and it uses, you know, TOML config files, which is a more modern way to do it. So part of this was just to modernize skills so that we can close that gap a little bit. Yep.
No, I totally get it. What could be another step, but I don't know if that because it requires a lot of work, is there's some functionality in skill that you could transform into Python functionality and remove this skill code. That would make it a little bit lighter and easier to debug and easier to kind of for other developers also to, you know, kind of collaborate. Are you planning to do this, or you want to leave it as it is because you never change a running system?
No, I think it's important that we're open to changing a running system, right? If we never change it, we can't improve. So it needs to be robust enough that we can go in and make changes, right? So that's why we need to have, you know, tests in place to make sure that when we go in and make a change, that we're not breaking existing functionality, right? So I think yeah, I'm definitely open to new ideas about how it could be done better. And like you're saying, if there's a way to do it that's lighter weight, that'd be great. Because yeah, the less we have to, or the less, support work we have to do, the more we can actually develop new, new stuff.
Yeah, I mean, what you're doing with skill is kind of on steroids. I think there's not so many very good skill coder that you can acquire also in order to debug and further support. I think if you go into the Python, it's for long term. It's better for you and for the collaborators, I think.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Definitely. But yeah, this is here for at least for the short term to ease that transition, certainly. Hopefully.
I get it. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's other ways to do it, right? There's like, right, you could directly interact with the database, right? If you have access to, there's some OA APIs, right? If you can join that organization, you can get access to those. I guess I haven't gone that route, but I've seen maybe some of the bag stuff has a little bit. And then, so then you can sidestep Cadence to some extent. And I think, yeah, or at least minimize how much you have to interact with it. Or there's, different ways you could do it, right? If there's an open source alternative to that, that'd be great. Like if we had the standard and we could interact with it directly. I think I've seen a few minor things out there, but yeah, there's like an OA viewer. But yeah, it's certainly something we could look into. Anyway, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, could you send me a kind of a link to that OA? I haven't heard of this.
Oh, the OA group.